Murders at Karlov Manor spoilers continue, and the commander deck leaks have started today, so we'll certainly be getting into those later in the week. But I want to talk about more of the noteworthy cards, at least in my opinion, from the slate of reveals. And if you guys haven't seen it, I've also been doing some shorts talking about some individual cards that I think are pretty cool, so definitely check those out. But let's jump right into it, and Frantic Scapegoat is so freaking cool. I love the art on these, like, I think it's the dossier or whatever they're called, showcase style. They just look so well done, and the drawing is, like, unique. And plus, it's a goat. Like, the fact that we don't have a goat commander yet is absolutely crazy. And yes, I know there's technically, like, changelings, but, like, realistic. Let's be realistic here. We should have a goat commander. Frantic Scapegoat is one red creature goat with haste. When it enters the battlefield, suspect it. Now, suspect, if you missed it when we talked about it earlier in a previous video, says that you target a creature, it gains menace, but it also cannot block. Whenever one or more creatures enter the battlefield under your control, if Frantic Scapegoat is suspected, you may suspect one of those other creatures. If you do, Frantic Scapegoat is no longer suspended. So not only is it thematically perfect, because of course it's a scapegoat, literally, but it's running around suspecting other things, which is just a beautiful flavor win. It's such a neat card, and I think something, I mean, I honestly wonder about, like, mono red being able to utilize this in standard, because it's, you know, it's low enough cost, and obviously it does have haste, but, like, being able to give your Swift Spear menace maybe early on and swing for faster bits of damage. But at the very least, I think this card's going to be very fun. It'll probably see good play in drafting, and I just think it's a fantastic design. I do. I think it's goated. I really do. And Anzrag the Quake Mole is our next one. This is 2 red-green legendary creature, Mole God. Whenever it becomes blocked, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there's an additional combat phase. You can pay 3, 2 red, and 2 green. Anzrag must be blocked each combat this turn if able. So there's a lot going on here for a card that costs 4. It is an 8/4 also, which is just pretty damn good stats, period, for that. But of course, there's the dilemma here of, do you block it if you're the opponent and not take 8 damage, or doing so is going to, of course, untap those creatures. You essentially have to block it till you kill it, otherwise you're just going to keep getting hit by repetitive combat phases, and I think that's pretty cool. Of course, the effect to actually make it be blocked is going to cost, a little bit in terms of that, but if you can pull it off, for 7 mana, you're pretty much just going to guarantee another combat, and of course this is for the turn, each combat this turn if able, so that's another thing it's got going for it. Interesting enough, someone pointed out that the World Tree actually works really well with this. It can fetch this directly from the deck because it's, a god card, and it technically falls into the same category as the other gods, which is just hilarious to me. But Anzrag is really, really cool design, and I actually think it's a decent card, so we'll see what type of builds people come up with for it, but I think it's worth noting that the card itself is quite fun. Franco's Buzz Crusher is a 2 red artifact creature insect thopter with flying and trample, and when it ETBs, for each player you can destroy up to 1 non-basic land that player controls. For each land destroyed this way, they may search their library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield, tapped, then shuffle. Now, obviously, a lot to unpack here. First of all, if you're playing this in mono red, whether commander, standard, or otherwise, you're typically not going to be playing too many non-basic lands, so this may not even impact you at all. The other place that this could really come into play is playing against opponents who don't play basics either. If they're playing, a very, multicolored deck with a lot of duels, they, could really suffer from this. Of course, land destruction is not popular amongst the community, and with good reason. It's definitely not the most fun thing to have to deal with, but this card does a lot for, a relatively low mana investment, specifically in decks that can make use of it and kind of not get hit as much by its downside. And, a 4/4 with flying and trample, definitely not the most, unimpressive stats. They're pretty solid. Someone pointed out on Reddit that you can actually use this with Flagstones of Trocaire, which is really funny. A legendary land, of course, when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you can search your library for a Plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So perhaps you use this to pop your own Flagstones of Trocaire and then get something else from the deck, just as a cute, maybe, way to, in decks that can get lands back from the grave, you can keep, thinning the deck and also getting some color fixing depending on what your color combinations are. Overall, though, it's a pretty neat card. I do think, the land destruction part of it's definitely, going to be unfun, but you have to take into consideration balance, and I don't think it's overly broken, but I do think it has, a neat bit of application, so it'll be interesting to see what type of places this card pops up. Incinerator of the Guilty might be one of the strongest mythics that we've seen from the set. It is 4 red creature dragon with flying and trample. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may collect evidence X. When you do, it deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker that player controls. This is a lot for a 6/6. It is, people's made comparisons to Balefire Dragon, and you can definitely see it. Of course, Balefire Dragon has to deal combat damage, and then it just deals that same amount of damage to players, but this hits planeswalkers, and also by collecting evidence, you can basically determine how much, obviously, if you're playing this in a deck with a lot of higher cost creatures or ways to fill up the graveyard fast, collect evidence is going to be a lot easier for you to resolve. So I think Balefire might be a little bit better in terms of its overall generic application, but this thing does cost 1 less, and it has the ability to take out planeswalkers while also controlling the amount of damage that you can deal to the other players. And all of those factors combined definitely adds up to a strong candidate for a pretty damn good card, especially in Commander. But I think, in Standard, if you can get past the mana cost here or find other ways to get this out, maybe by getting it engraved with something and then reviving it, it's got a lot going for it. Cryptic Coat is 2 and a blue artifact equipment, and it says when Cryptic Coat enters the battlefield, cloak the top card of your library, then attach Cryptic Coat to it. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked. 1 and a blue, return Cryptic Coat to its owner's hand. Now, if you miss Cloak, Cloak is essentially another version of Morph. Cloak puts a creature onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 with Ward 2, and then you can turn it face up for its cost. Definitely, a really strong mechanic they've kind of been pushing a little bit in this set. But this card is extremely cool because it's returnable to the hand, so you can bounce it and you can keep doing it. I saw someone point out combos with a Zuri, Claw of Progress, because technically the creature is going to enter the battlefield before it gets that buff, and it will meet Zuri's criteria. So that's definitely something interesting to note. Also, Cryptic Coat in general being an equipment that doesn't have an equip cost, because the only way to equip it is, of course, by attaching the top card. I definitely really like this card. I like the disguise and cloak mechanics as a whole, and this one is no exception. I do think people are going to like it. It's just pretty damn strong, and there's a lot of application for this card across a variety of different decks, without a doubt. Doorkeeper Thrall is a really strong card, like unbelievably strong. I was actually kind of surprised it's only a rare. It is 1 and a white, it has flash, flying, and says artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. Now, right off the bat, someone pointed out the elementals in Modern, how this completely shuts them off by not allowing their enter the battlefield effects to trigger, which is certainly very strong. But in general, there are not too many cards that actually stop artifacts from triggering, and typically the few cards that we do have that stop, ETBs, we have Elish Norn, who specifically stops, entering the battlefield effects when things trigger upon that. But this stops both creatures and artifacts, and it has flash, meaning you can certainly time it in a way that you can do the most damage with it and kind of, really put pressure on the opponent. And this card's obviously going to be something that the opponent's going to want to get off the field as quickly as possible. But depending on when you play it, and if you utilize the flash effectively, you could essentially get this out in a way that your opponent's already going to be kind of fucked with whatever play it was they were looking to make. Lamplight Phoenix is 1 red flying that says when it dies, you may exile and collect evidence 4. If you do, return Lamplight Phoenix to the battlefield tapped. It is a 3/3, of course, and people drew comparisons to Arclight Phoenix. I think Arclight is infinitely better. While this is kind of a cool card from a concept perspective and may even be somewhat decent in a draft format, I don't think it's going to see much of an impact meta-wise, even in Standard. I mean, it doesn't have haste. Collect evidence 4, I guess mono red can kind of meet that criteria, so it might be such you could utilize it there. But generally speaking, it's not doing enough for you, and it comes back tapped. It's a cool card. I just don't have high expectations for it in terms of any type of competitive performance, but I've been wrong before and will probably be wrong again, so just keep that in mind when you're looking at this, and of course make your own decisions. Leyline of the Guild Pact. This one I was really surprised to see, but it's actually quite cool. So it's a 4-drop enchantment that needs, I'm going to try to do this from memory. So it's Celestia, Samir, Golgari, and I can't remember the last one. I completely blanked on it, but red-green. So obviously combination mana, you can bring this out for a good bit of different things. You can bring it out for 4 green though, so there is that. If it's in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. Each non-land permanent you control is all colors. Lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. So it's like a chromatic lantern, but it also, the changing the non-land permanent colors is neat, unless you're playing against someone who has creatures that have protection from specific colors, in which case they basically become unblockable, and pseudo kind of invincible for the most part, depending on which ways you have to get over it. And then, obviously the Leyline series, there's a lot of cards that are already there, but this is kind of the first one that is multicolor, which is definitely interesting. And it's obviously, if you open with it, it's really good. But then, if you don't, it's increasingly less strong, unless you're able to find ways to really utilize that color combination thing to your advantage. Obviously, things like Domain, which is a keyword from Dominaria United, which triggers off of basic land type, certainly combos quite well with this because you can get the max out of your domain effects just by having like a couple lands out. So that's a neat little fun fact. I think this card's really good. I just think it's going to be a bit more niche in terms of its application, but there will be place for it, no doubt. And finally, Conspiracy Unraveler is a 5 blue creature Sphinx Detective with flying. You may collect evidence 10 rather than pay the mana cost for spells you cast. First thing that came to mind here was Omniscience, of course, which allows you to just cast spells from your hand without paying their mana cost in general. But I think this card's actually got a lot of potential in specific strategies. Now, I know I've said that a lot with certain cards, but if you're playing a high-cost deck, specifically, Eldrazi or large dragons, or maybe some kind of like Simic Stompy type deck, if you have big creatures in grave, you can just exile to play your spells for free. What happens is you kind of start to stockpile more things to collect evidence with, because if you banish a 10 from the grave to cast a 10, and then you have another one in grave, and you can banish that to cast something else. I mean, you can kind of see the point of how it'll start to stack up those resources rather quickly for you, which is not something to sneeze at, because if you get going and you can find a way to get it out, you can really do a lot of damage with this. And, even in standard, cards like Breach the Multiverse, definitely, a popular card that does a lot of, has a lot of, application with something like this. So it's a really neat card, and I'm kind of curious to see where exactly it'll slot, but you may have to build around it a tad. I think it's going to be really strong, though, overall, in terms of its application in decks that can make use of it. Well, that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Let me know what you think of these reveals in the comment section down below. I think this set's shaping up to be extremely fun, and it looks like it's going to have a good impact on Standard, but also introduce a bunch of cards into Commander that will definitely allow us to get a bit more creative with our building. So definitely let me know in the comments what you think. Be sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.